The following is a production of Gearhead Media. All right, welcome back to the All Automotive Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Clausen, and today we're talking about motor oil. And who better to talk about motor oil than the motor oil geek? Today we're talking to Lake Speed Jr. He is a certified lubrication specialist. He's got his own YouTube channel. We'll talk about that. And again, I am so glad that you're all here for this episode, and welcome to the All Automotive Podcast. Hey, Lake, good to talk to you, man. How's it going?
Same here. Doing good. I like your shirt, man. You're representing Melling, Jackson, Michigan.
Melling
Good
Tool,
stuff.
Yeah, they're right around the corner from us. So, yeah, we actually can go over there and pick up parts at Will Call. It's not that far. I mean, it's literally 2 miles from my shop, not even. And we use a lot of their stuff, and this is a shirt they gave me. It's got an LS engine on the back of it.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I'm in the process of putting an LS engine together for my old 68 C10. It's an older one. It's one of the first LS versions, LQ4. It's a 6-liter. And I'm using their bearings, their camshaft, their lifters, their rocker arms, so it's got a lot of milling parts in it. So everybody's like, here, have a free t-shirt. So they
That's
came
awesome.
by they came by the shop a couple weeks ago and gave us some free stuff. So it's nice, and it's cool to have them in the backyard, because getting parts for all kinds of different things, and they do just more than just speed parts. But it's good to hear that you worked for them. That was how long ago?
Longer than I want to admit.
All right.
The previous century.
Like Bill Elliott. All right.
Yeah, no, but it's funny that actually is the beginning of my journey into tribology. Was working for Melling. Obviously, oil pumps are still a huge part of their business, and they actually owned a NASCAR team. They didn't just sponsor; they owned the number 9 NASCAR team. Obviously, Bill Elliott, super famous for that. But
Right.
Later in my dad's career, he drove for them. And then really right around the time that Dad was retiring, I went to work for him and ended up working there for several years as a team manager when Chad Canals, who obviously went on to become a
bigger and
Hall of
better
Fame
things.
crew chief. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
7 times.
Chad and I worked together, and one of our sponsors at the time was Ford Motorcraft. And oddly enough, and I'm not sure if I've ever told this story before, on YouTube, is that I remember our engine guy, Ernie Elliott, did our engines for us. And he was very specific about the type of oil I needed to request from Motorcraft for them to run in the engine or break him in on the dyno. And I was like, oh, interesting. I remember asking him, like, well, why? He said, well, that's just what we have found works the best. We got to have, this kind of oil. I was like, interestingly enough. So I kind of put that little thought in my head. We got them the 20W50 mineral-based oil that they asked for, and they were good. And then years later, when I was at Joe Gibbs Racing, and we were working with the guys at Lubrizol, who most people don't know who Lubrizol is.
Right.
But you probably remember the old commercials. Remember the old BASF commercials? We don't make the products you buy. We make the products you buy better.
Yeah.
Because they make the components that go into those products. So when it comes to motor oil and fuel, there are 4 companies that are like BASF. And oddly enough, BASF actually supplies some of those companies. So it's really weird. How irony it works sometimes. That's Lubrizol, Afton, Ornite, and Infinium. So whatever your favorite brand of oil is, or where you like to go get gas, the additives that are in the fuel, that are in the oil, came from Lubrizol, Afton, Ornite, or Infinium. They're the big players when it comes to the world of oil and fuel additives. Lots of marketing, very few
Right.
manufacturers. And so at Gibbs, we were able to be hooked up with the guys at Lubrizol And one of the products that we came out with that ended up really being huge in the engine building market was a break-in oil. And it was a 1550, not a 2050, but it was mineral based, and it had all the right levels of additives and not the stuff in there you don't want for break-in. And that was a big thing. So it was really similar in a lot of ways to what Ernie and those guys had asked for back when I was at Melling and we were sponsored by Motorcraft as one of our associate sponsors.
Right.
So that's really where the oil journey kind of began, was back in my days at Melling.
Awesome. And now you're talking about Joe Gibbs Racing, and you were there when Bobby Labonte and Tony Stewart. Yeah.
Yep.
Big Tony Stewart fan for sure, myself.
Oh yeah, it was really the greatest era, I think, in NASCAR was that mid 2000s, 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9 in there. It was pretty cool. The amount of money that was in NASCAR at the time was the most it had ever been. And from the engine perspective, and I'm an engine guy, right? The motor oil geek, right? Motor comes before the oil. I love engines. And at that time, the development of the NASCAR engines was just on an incredible pace. Pretty much every top NASCAR engine builder at the time had some kind of connection to Formula One, just some kind of supplier network or something. We had crankshafts coming out of Europe. We had lifters being DLC coated, diamond light carbon coating being done in Europe. We were using F1 technology,
wow,
but putting it into a push rod V8 and spinning these engines. I mean, I remember at Pocono one year, Robbie Gordon's team, they were turning 11,000 RPM during the race.
Wow.
NASCAR had changed the rule where these people would put an overdrive gear.
A gear,
so
yeah.
4-speed transmission. But what you normally would do is you do first, second, third would be your normal gears. And then fourth would have been overdrive, where they would flip it around and make third the overdrive and fourth the 1-to-1. You would do that because the long straightaways of Pocono. Because you realize that, and there were 3 different length straightaways, so that if you wanted to get the gearing right, you needed to shift. So NASCAR, with their gear rule, was like, no, we don't want people to shift anymore, blah, blah, blah. Well, Robbie just said, I'm going to go faster anyway if I shift. So I'm going to shift. But that means you were turning 11,000 RPM when you shifted.
Yeah, down to third.
They made it. It's a 500-mile race. That's a grueling 500-mile race. And Robbie started doing it in practice, and he did it in qualifying, and he did it in the race. And this is back when you couldn't change engines. So they were, I think, 7 or 8 laps from the end of the race when a valve spring finally broke after turning 11,000 RPM for the whole race. That's crazy. Yeah. Like, laid off, like, just don't do a happy hour, right? Just don't shift the happy hour, and you would have made the whole race distance probably.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that are different with NASCAR nowadays, to where they're not doing like the happy hour or the practicing, or it's so much different than it was back then. And I was like you, I was much more of a fan of the sport back then than I guess I am now, but I still am now. It's just, I'm struggling to find somebody to follow at this point. But I mean, I'm a Kyle Larson fan, I guess, because he's a racer like Tony Stewart. He can get into whatever he wants, and Tony was a Triple Crown winner, and it's just, he can get into a car and just drive, and it's interesting how he can go from 235 miles an hour in an Indy car and then just jump into the Gen 7 NASCAR and do it at Charlotte like he did. And it's a bad day for him, I guess, on both aspects. But that's called racing. That thing happens. So
he's human.
Yeah.
Right. Surprise, he's human, right? There was a time when Jimmy Johnson was winning everything, that I'm pretty sure he wasn't human. Now we can see that Jimmy actually was human, or is human. But there was a pretty much time period there when Jimmy rarely made mistakes. It was just crushing. I remember hearing Denny Hamlin say one time, I've been a multiple-time champion. It haven't been for Jimmy Johnson being in the sport the same time as me. And it's true, right? I mean, Jimmy and Chad and those guys just crushed everybody. And just like Michael Schumacher and Ferrari did, they just crushed everybody. They were just the best. It's awesome. I know people at the time thought it was boring because the same guys winning all the time.
It's something to do, though.
Hats off, man. They did it. I mean, it's incredibly competitive sport. I mean, I will get a lot of hate mail for this statement. Jimmy Johnson's 7 championships mean more than the other 2 guys who have 7 because he did it against harder competition.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. And even Tony said it. He's like, being bookends to that is just, it's incredible. And so like I said, I'm looking for, I'm pretty much following Hendricks Motorsports, and I don't know, Tony left with all that stuff, and that kind of was a little disappointing, but I get it. He's doing NHRA now, and that's a whole different thing, and that's crazy. But give us a little bit of rundown and talk a little bit about what people should be looking for when they're buying their oil. Now, I'm an AMSOIL guy. We deal with AMSOIL. We're an AMSOIL dealer, and we sell that oil. It's one of the best, in my opinion. I don't know about you. I know you got some partially types of oil, and this isn't sponsored by AMSOIL by any means or any oil manufacturer, but talk about the things that people should be looking for when they're buying their oil. Should they get it at Walmart or should they not?
Well, really the question to ask first is, what kind of student do you want to be? And that's the best analogy I have for a consumer is to, before I answer your question, I need to know, what kind of student do you want to be? Are you the C's get degrees kind of way you want to go? That, hey, I just want to give it to me easy. What's the easy answer?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the easy answer is different. It's a different path than the person that says, I want to be valedictorian. I want to graduate top of my class. I want to be the best. You end of the day, you both get a degree.
Right.
But they're very different paths because one has a little bit different outcome than the other. I think we all can understand that. So if you're the C's get degrees kind of person, there's this thing called your owner's manual. And you can literally go to the back of your owner's manual and you can look up what viscosity grade they call for, what spec they call for. And you can go to Walmart and you can go buy whatever oil, whatever brand that you want. Doesn't matter. From the Walmart brand to Rural Purple or whatever in between, whatever brand you like, buy that brand as long as it meets the viscosity and the spec that the OEM calls for, and put it in. And it's kind of like you don't have to think. And you can use your oil life indicator and follow what they tell you, and you're going to be within what they told you to do, right? You're in a one way, you're deferring to what they tell you. It doesn't require you to think, and it puts all the onus on the OEM to make sure they told you right. We'll get to that later.
Right.
Okay, that's that path. That's easy. Like, you don't need to have a motor.
Yeah, it's on the oil cap.
That, right?
I mean, look and see what's on the oil cap. Is it meet the SP, the API rating, and let's go.
We will be back after a short break.
Hey everybody, Matt here. Wanted to take a minute to talk about our main sponsor, G-Force Automotive. Did you know that they're a certified service center through Auto Value? What does that get you, you say? Well, that gets you 3 years or 36,000 mile warranty on select repairs. Want to know more about that? Visit their website at www.gforceautomotive.net. click on that banner that says make an appointment and make your appointment today. We're proud to have them on board as the main sponsor of the All Automotive podcast. So now let's get back to it. More of the All Automotive podcast.
If you want to be valedictorian, it's going to take more work than that. And the key thing of this is don't start with the brand. What you want to do is you actually want to start with the OEM recommended oil.
Right.
Because the engine in your vehicle, when they were developing it and testing it and certifying that build spec, they did it with their oil. Now, we all know none of the car manufacturers make oil. Yeah, we all know that. They buy it from one of their suppliers. Usually they have a partnership. ExxonMobil is really tight with General Motors. So if you have a GM car or truck, they use equivalent Mobil 1 in their vehicles. That's what they use their testing with. So that's where you start, because that's what they did it on. So if you start with what they told you, where they developed, I guess, then you can do used oil analysis and you can measure how effective they are. Then, based on that used oil analysis, you can begin to iterate and say, okay, if my vehicle calls for, okay, in this case, 0W20, Dexos 1, Gen 3 oil, then boom, you can put that in there. Then, once you get past break-in, and I will say this, here's my big exception to following the OEM advice. I mean, if you do, C's get degrees, you're probably not doing an oil change in the first 500 miles.
Yeah.
But if you have a brand new car or truck, you should be doing, and you own it, you should be doing an oil change in the first 500 miles. And then again, probably around 2,000 miles. And then again, probably around 3,000 miles later than that. Before you get to that first 7,500 miles, you should probably have the oil change at least 3 times, because it's going to take that many oil changes in that amount of time for the break-in to actually complete and to get all the junk out of the engine. And I can tell you this, not based on my opinion, but as a used oil analyst that looks at oil sample results every single day, dozens a day, I can tell you that there is probably 10 times the amount of wear during break-in than the rest of the life of the engine. And the only way to get that out is to change the oil. Your oil filter is not going to capture all of it. The engine is dirtier, the oil is dirtier, brand new, than it will be later. So do your engine a favor. If you plan on owning it for a long period of time, change the oil at least 3 times in the first 7,000 miles of the engine's life, and you will be doing yourself a world of good. That's step 1. While you're at it, you should probably take oil samples of each of those, because that's going to give you the high watermark of what wear looks like in your engine. Because if you ever get close to those same numbers again, you have a problem. So it gives you a frame of reference, because that first 3 should be dropping as you take
steadily down. Yeah.
Yep, steadily down. When you find that spot where it levels out, then you're okay. Here we are, right? We did all this with the OEM oil. Here's where we are. Then you can say, all right, let's try that AMSOIL Signature Series 0W20. Let's just do a change and let's see. Now the trick is, when you do an oil change like that from one brand to another, the first set of results don't tell you the full picture,
right?
Because you're not getting all the oil out, and you haven't allowed that additive package to fully do its job, because that has to replace the previous one. So it's the second sample, the second fill, is going to be the one that really tells you what the oil is capable of. Then you can measure, compare. What did the first oil sample do? What did that second one do? So here's our AMSOIL, here's our Mobil 1. Which one's better? But how did it work? Then you can see. And you don't need to have someone else tell you and say, oh, this is the best, or that's the best, or this is good and that's bad. You can just find out. Then you can also begin to utilize that data to determine what the proper oil change interval is. If you live somewhere where it's really cold, like in Michigan, and you do short trip driving, you're probably not going to get 25,000 miles on that oil. Even though it says it's capable of it, it will never happen because it's too cold where you live. And if you do short trip driving, you're going to build up fuel dilution, you're going to build up condensation that's going to affect the oil life, and you're going to have to change the oil. But maybe you live in Arizona and it's hot. You might be able to go a lot further because you're not going to have the fuel dilution problems, but you may have high oil temperatures. And especially if you're pulling a motorhome or a toter behind you, you're probably going to have high oil temperatures, which is going to shorten your oil life, because every 18 degrees Fahrenheit, you increase the oil temperature, you cut the oil life in half. I'm going to say that one more time, just so for emphasis.
Right.
Every 18 degrees Fahrenheit, you increase your oil temperature, you cut the oil life in half. So beginning from basically an infinite life in terms of the base oil, as you increase oil temperature, operating temperature, go from say 220F to 240F, you cut the working life of the oil in half because you double the oxidation rate. And oxidation is the degradation, chemical degradation of the product. So how you drive, where you drive, factors into oil life. So anyone that gives you a absolute number, oh, this is how far you should go with your oil, don't listen to them, because they just prove to you they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
That might work for them where they live, great. But you should not assume that what works for you where you live in Chicago works for the same guy or same vehicle in San Diego.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the questions I wanted to get to you too, is when should we change our oil? I mean, there's an oil life index, which I know GM cars back in the day when I was at the dealership, they worked off of what's called combustion events, and that percentage works down from 100. And man, I don't know if I can really go 7,500 miles, or
you can trust it.
I mean,
the GM oil life 100, you can trust it. So I actually did a video about it on my channel. So
oh, did you?
There was three engineers at GM that developed that program. Paul Harvath, Shirley Schwartz, and Don Smolinski. And Shirley, her nickname was Sister Sludge. She's actually like in the National Chemistry Hall of Fame, because what they figured out is essentially what you're talking about was called the oil to fuel ratio. So I use that for every combustion event, you're shortening the life of the oil. But the GM oil life indicator is an intelligent algorithm that factors in the operating temperature of the engine. So it knows when the engine's cold, you're going to get a bigger debit for each combustion event. So every time fuel goes in the oil, you're shortening the life of the oil.
Right, because in the winter, it goes down faster.
So when it's cold, it goes down faster. But the flip side, if it gets really, really hot, towing the trailer in Arizona, it also debits it really quickly. So it really moves around. But when it's like highway driving on a 72-degree day and everything's good, it can extend it back out a little bit, the debit shorter. And then just for a fail-safe, if the engine does overheat, boom, it throws it. At 1 year, it throws it. Just to make sure there's some guardrails,
right,
to keep people from going way off. And all the tests that I've done, I've never seen an oil life indicator overextend the drain interval based on, we'll call it degradation, like the normal chemical degradation paths. Now, what it doesn't account for is break-in, and that on the front end. So that's an issue. Or for fuel dilution, if you get dirty injectors and things like that, it's not. So that's where the oil life indicator, I said before, like if you just do what GM tells you, then the ball's on in their court. You can use whatever oil they tell you, whatever spec they tell you, follow the oil life indicator. It's gonna lead you right, as long as all that stuff goes where it's supposed to go. But as good as the oil life indicator is, and I'm not sure about the other manufacturers. I've heard mixed reviews. I know, like my wife's
Right.
Toyota, it does not have an oil life. It has a maintenance indicator. It
Yeah.
tells
A
you when to
reminder.
change the oil, but it's based on odometer. It does not factor in how you drive.
Right. And
So
most of the,
it can be wrong.
in my experience, most of the Japanese cars are just come down from a certain mileage, like you set it at 6,000 or 8,000 or whatever you want to set it at, and then it comes down from there. But I know, working at the dealer and having all those questions, and I really appreciate the clarification on all of that stuff as far as the GM oil life index, because a lot of people are confused with that percentage because they're like, oh, I'm out of oil. And it's like, no, you're not out of oil. You're just out of oil life.
Yeah, it's not oil level.
It's not the level. No.
Yeah, it's not. You know, they were really smart. It's a great. I got to meet two of the different people that were part of that team and got to interview one of them for the video. It was really cool.
That's really cool.
You know,
I'll have to go searching for that video, because I'll be honest with you. I've watched probably about 10 of your videos in the last couple of weeks.
Sorry.
Anyway. No, don't be sorry, because I'm a motor oil geek like yourself, or, ASE master technician. So I've got to know all this stuff. And sometimes the videos are a little dry, but hey, if you're into oil, it is what it is. It is what it is.
This isn't a Mr. Beast video, right?
Right, exactly. And
I'm not.
It's science.
It's like, hey, we're talking about oil here.
Right. It's based on science, not speculation, like you always say. So I've got a 2024 Silverado with the 6.2 liter gas direct injected engine, and I've got 21,000 miles on it. And I wish I would have watched your videos about changing my oil in the first 500 miles when I bought the truck. However, I did do my oil, because the dealership gives you a free oil change. So I was like, okay, let's take advantage of that. And I know they use mobile Dexos, whatever. 0W20 is what it calls for. And now GM has said, well, we've got a problem with these engines, because on 3 different separate occasions, we did an investigation on oil bearing crank clearance, and they've decided that some of these engines that are built within a certain date range have had issues with catastrophic failures. Mm-hmm. So now when this recall came out, and I know you did a video on this, throwing out basically the oil recommendation. Now we've touched on the oil recommendation as far as what's on the cap. Now, what's on the cap of my truck, it says 0W20. Now, when this recall first came out, they were talking about, okay, well, if your engine has survived this long, we're just going to change your oil cap and put an insert in your owner's manual and switch you to the 0W40 supercar, which 0W40, as I know now, is gives, the difference between 20 weight and 40 weight. You can expand on this a little bit.
Sure.
It gives you that extra distance between the crankshaft and the bearing, the oil. It puts a little bit more distance in there, right?
Yeah. So the core issue with the L87 recall is crankshaft surface finish.
Yeah.
And there's some mitigating factors to this in terms of clearances and stuff like that. But the underlying issue is the roughness on the surface of the crankshaft journal. When the surface finish is correct, smooth, you can run the thinner oil no problem. And that's kind of the issue with the confusion around the recall, because what the internet's great about is smoking out stuff when it comes out. Like the day the first bulletin was issued, there was a Reddit thread within like hours, right, if not minutes, on this thing. But that recall notice didn't really mention anything about the other two that were coming. Fortunately, the NHTSA, which is the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, whatever it is, they have a bulletin that basically gives you the 30,000 foot, view of this whole situation,
right.
where there were going to be 3 recall notices all along. The failure here is in General Motors' ability to communicate, and whoever thought that they could put out a bulletin on this thing and it be silent is just dumb, right? It's like, what world do you think
Freedom
we live
of
in?
Information Act. Here we go.
Right. I mean, do you really thought you were going to be able to say this? Whatever. Getting off track. So here's the reality of the situation. The engines that do pass the test, right? The cam alignment test. And that's all about oil pressure is what that is.
Yeah.
So they can see that, make sure that the bearings haven't fallen. It's just an easy way of checking to see the bearings are falling out of it without having to take the engine out of the vehicle and drop the oil pan and check bearings. That's really hard. So we can do the cam alignment and kind of get a check. And I guess they got the picoscope thing now too, so you can listen to the engine. So they got a couple of ways they can kind of check and see, is this engine okay? Is it hurt? If it's hurt, okay, we got to pull the engine out and we're going to put a new engine in it. And that new engine is going to have the correct surface finish crankshaft. So the new engine is going to have 0W20 in it.
Yep.
If the engine passes the test, we're putting 040 in it because we're uncertain on how rough that crankshaft surface finish is. So by going from 020 to 0W40, you increase the bearing oil film thickness, which will compensate for the rougher surface. And then you're good, because what happens is all oils get thinner as they get hotter.
Right.
So the worst case scenario for one of these engines is an engine where the bearing clearances are on the looser side of the tolerance range, because there's always a tolerance range when these engines are assembled.
Right.
If it's on the loose side of the tolerance range with the 020, with the rougher surface finish on the crankshaft, and we're towing the boat, and we're running down the highway, and with my 10-speed transmission, it's dropped this thing down into 1600, 1700 RPM, and I'm going up a steady grade, and my cylinder deactivation is turned off. So I've got 4 cylinders cranking out as much load as they can to try to keep this thing going. Now you've created the worst case scenario for that oil film. That oil film, because the engine speed, you think about water skiing, the faster the boat goes,
the higher up,
the more the skier floats up. When the boat goes slow, skier drops down. Viscosity is the same thing. At low engine speeds and high oil temperature, I have really, really thin films. That's what can cause the bearing to grab the crankshaft because of that rough surface. The oil's not thick enough to cover up all those peaks like you see in the picture in the background. It can't grab that. But if the oil's thicker, same worst case scenario, but you put 040 in there, now it never gets too thin for those peaks to touch the bearing. There is no failure. That's the whole thing in the nutshell.
Yeah.
We're using viscosity to mask improper surface finish, which is fine. Engine should be just fine. No issues at all. That's why they've given the 10-year, 150,000 mile warranty to the engines that pass the test that run the 0W40.
So it's interesting. I did reach out to my local dealer and asked that I get a return phone call to find out exactly what they were going to do. And I don't know if they know yet, but I haven't got a call back, and I'm going to call over there again just to make sure. But, you know, in my experience and what I've seen and what I've heard and what I've read, you know, the internet's a wonderful place, but sometimes you can't believe everything that you read.
Yep.
But for those engines that were affected with that crankshaft that was incorrectly ground and finished. Most of those, in my research, have failed below 10,000 miles.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not going to live 50 to 100,000 miles and then blow.
Yeah.
Unless you have the weird, super weird scenario where this engine's never been taxed. And then all of a sudden, you put it into some scenario that's never seen before. And now you finally find that little bit of, you get the oil thin enough where it can actually do do damage.
Yeah.
But otherwise, that's.
And I was looking at some of the differences between the 020, the 030, and the 040. And there's a big difference between the thickness at 100 Celsius. Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit about that. I know 020's down in the 8s and 040's up in the 12s, I think. Talk a little bit about that and what the difference is between, I know they're looking for gas mileage with 020.
Yeah.
And thanks for the clarification too on the, if you get a new engine, you will still be, it has the correct crank bearing clearance and the issue is gone. So you're still going to want to burn or use the 0W20. And I'm at 21,700 and it's only seen their oil once. And then it's seen AMSOIL Signature Series 020 for the other 3 oil changes that I'm almost due. And I bought a case of 0W30 and I want to know from your perspective.
Yeah.
Should that be something I'm thinking about, or if they tell me to use 040, is that what I should use?
Well, okay. So some perspective, like you kind of mentioned that the whole reason 020 was spec'd for that engine here in the U.S. to begin with is for EPA fuel economy regulations. That's why there's cylinder deactivation. That's why there's auto stop start. That's why there's variable valve timing. All of these things that are in the engine are there to improve fuel economy to meet EPA regulations. Now, that doesn't mean that's bad. Just understand why it's there. That's why it's
right.
there. That's
and I think a lot of it's misunderstood.
Yeah,
and I hear, it's water and you should never run that stuff. And it's like, oh, come on.
No, we ran thinner oils than that in a 900 horsepower engine. I'm not opposed. I'm not afraid of thin oils, but the engine has to be built for it. And that's where the issue with the crankshaft, right? You can't run 020 with a crankshaft that has the too rough as a surface. It's playing out in real life.
Right.
So 020 by itself isn't a problem. I would say this, though, based on what we've seen from all of this, if we want to be the A student, not the C student, you're going to be doing oil analysis, and then you can easily see, okay, how much wear do I get with 020? How much wear do I get with 030? And the key thing is stay with the same brand, where everything is essentially the same. All you're doing is just changing that viscosity,
yeah.
that centistoke, the flow rate at 100 degrees Celsius, 212 degrees Fahrenheit. When you're going from 8 centistokes to 10 centistokes, you're just increasing the resistance to flow, because that's all viscosity is, the fancy word for resistance to flow. And that resistance to flow, when in the bearing, translates into it floating higher, making that wedge a little bit easier. So, of course, the downside is like Goldilocks 3 bears, right? You don't want it too thin, because now you won't build the film, but you don't want it too thick, because now it won't cool properly. So there's a limit. Thicker isn't always better. Thinner isn't always better. Right is better.
Right.
And to know what's right for your engine, where you live, how you drive, and what all those little factors is to do the oil analysis to be able to know. Because sometimes we've seen people change from, say, 020 to, say, a 0W40, and wear actually increases. They thought that they were going to do the right thing because they put a thicker oil in the engine, and that made sense to them. but it didn't work out. Now, it wasn't a dramatic amount of wear difference. Well, one of them was. But sometimes you see people make that same change and wear goes down. So sometimes it does help. Sometimes it doesn't help.
Yeah, that's where I was.
Back to, you don't know what engines are different. Operating conditions are different. So when you get the right oil for the application, and the application being what type of engine it is, where it's being operated, how it's being operated, when you get all that stuff right, you're going to get better results. And it should not matter what the brand is or what the viscosity is. If the results are better, that's the one to use. Back to, let the science tell you, not your feelings. Don't be afraid of something. The worst decisions in my life I've ever made are the ones that I made based out of fear, not out of facts. We live in a world today where we can plug in an WD2 reader and get a whole lot of facts about the engine.
Right.
We can send off an oil sample and get it analyzed and get a whole lot of facts about the oil. There's no reason in today's world to make decisions based on fear when we have tons of facts available at our fingertips.
So talk about your speed diagnostics. Are you the guy? Are you the one that we'd send these oil samples to see what kind of wear we're getting on?
I'm not the lab technician. I'm not running the tests
but
themselves, but we have a lab that does that. But I'm the analyst, so I'm like the doctor in this equation. If you're sick, you go to the doctor. He's not the one that normally draws the blood. He's not the one that's going to run the lab test, but he's going to be the one that writes up and says, you need to tell the lab technician to run these tests. Then send me the results, and then I'm going to tell you if you're doing okay or not. I'm the doctor in this equation.
Yeah. So like I said, I was going to, depending on what they tell me with the recall, I was going to switch it to, take a sample of the 0W20 that's in there now, and then send that to you, and then put 030 in it, and then send that sample to you and see what we got as far as differences between those two. And then maybe, if they're telling me 040, I don't want to go against their recommendation because, hey,
give it a go.
That's just what they're telling us. And as far as the 0W40, it's like, and I've told people this too, and I was a service manager, service director. I made the call on whether your engine was covered or not covered, or I made the phone call to GM to say this person deserves a replacement engine. If you're not following what they're telling you, then you do run the risk, as in my opinion, you do run the risk of them saying, no, we told you to run 0W40 and we can prove that this is 0W30 based on the oil sample that we took.
They'd have a hard time doing that, by the way.
Oh, would they?
The example you picked is one they will struggle to tell anybody for a fact that they didn't run 040, especially unless they're running the supercar oil, because what happens is most 040s shear down into a 30 grade. So it's going to be really tough for them to say, well, because a lot of times, like, perfect example, the Mobile One European 0W40, 1 out of 100 samples we see of that is actually still in grade. Almost all the time, because of that wide split between the number before the W and after the W, the way you get there is by adding more polymer, more viscosity index improver to the oil. That tends to be less shear stable, especially in where you've got variable valve timing. You got these things that can mechanically shear the polymers. You'll lose viscosity. So there won't be any, and the supercar oil does the same. It's the only way they'll be able to know that you're not running 040 supercar oil
is by the additives.
Is the additive package.
Yeah.
It won't be anything else other than the additive package. But the problem is, there is not enough Mobile One 040 supercar oil on the planet to take care of all the engines that have already passed the test. So GM is out right now talking to different oil companies saying, would you please make a 0W40, Dexos R spec oil. But the challenge is they still want you to pass all the tests.
Right.
And pay basically $1 million in engine testing plus the licensing fee to GM to be able to do it. Now, they're saying we're going to give you a year to do all the testing, which the reality is what most people will do and what GM is going to have to accept. This is just the fact of the matter. No one can come up with a brand new Dexos R spec oil that's a knockoff of the supercar oil and get it tested and get it to market in time for it to make a difference. So what's going to happen is it's going to be a Dexos 1 Gen 3 oil. The viscosity has been changed, modified to be a 0W40. So it won't be a Dexos R. So it won't have that same additive profile.
Right.
And they're going to have to live with it, which is back to saying, in this bigger case, if you ran a different 0W30, they'll never know. They'll never, ever be able to know they're going to have to trust whatever the customer tells them.
Yeah.
That this is what we did.
Interesting.
Because they can't tell. Because it's going to be, this is the total disaster for GM.
Yeah. Well, I'd heard that they moved the machine that does the crankshaft or something I don't know if that's true or not, but they moved the machine, and when they moved the machine, it put it out of spec, or I don't know. I mean,
I've heard a lot.
I know
of
some
things.
Machinists that would tell you that, well, we set this thing up and it's got to be, unless it was dropped off the back end of the semi. I mean, I don't know. I mean, machine's got to be pretty
problem
big.
is it ran that way for 4 years. That's the issue, right?
Right. Yeah.
Said you did this for 4 years. It was producing out of spec parts for 4 years.
I don't know. Yeah, but then
the reality is, if it was being out of spec, it wasn't very far out of spec. So it would be interesting to know was it really the machine doing the polishing on the crankshaft, or was it the machine doing the measuring?
Yeah,
we'll probably never know the answer to those things, but
yeah,
I bet they didn't miss it by much.
Yeah. Well, and then, as far as some of the recalls that we dealt with back in the day, it's just like, well, these people are telling me, oh, well, how come mine's not recalled? Well, it's just like, okay, they have like build dates and Julian numbers, and we had recalls on the 3.1 engine back in the day for piston slap or whatever it was. And it was like, well, does it make the noise? Yeah, it makes the noise. Well, you get a new engine because it was guaranteed for 6 years or 120,000 miles.
Yeah.
So and I'm surprised that when the LS engine first came out that we weren't replacing a lot of those with piston slap too. Lake, I'm so thankful for you to show up and give us all this information today on our podcast. I got so many more questions, but I want to be respectful of your time. I mean, I could sit here and talk to you for hours, and
I got more oil announcer reports I got to go do.
You got more. So
listen, we've got in the last couple of weeks, I don't know how many L87 oil samples I've done. And reality is almost all of them look great.
Yeah. And I'm going to send you mine. And I tell you, tell everybody how they can do that really quick. I know.
So Speed Diagnostics, and it's spelled really weird. It's SPEEDIAGNOSTIX. It's spelled weird like that, so it can be trademarked and everything like that. So speeddiagnostics.com is our website, and we have kits. So you can just order the kit, ship it to you, and follow the instructions in the box, and we can send you back results.
Excellent. I'm going to do that, and you're going to look for it, and then give me some science on my L87, because I'm not too worried, because it's got a race car mode, and I'm a heavy foot anyway, and I put it in manual shift mode, and I ran it to whatever the red line says. So I'm just like, okay, well, it's already been redlined, so I'm not really sure that my engine's really in danger, but it might be, like, based on the way I drive.
Well, the best way to break them in is just do that, right? You don't baby them. Go out there, and when it gets it warmed up, go romp on it, and do that. It makes a difference.
All right. Well, again, I appreciate you coming on the show today, and hopefully we can have you on one more time, some time down the road. All right, that's going to do it for another episode of the All Automotive Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Clausen. And a big thanks to Lake Speed Jr. for being on the show today. Gosh, his knowledge is outstanding when it comes to motor oil. His experience with Joe Gibbs Racing and working at Melling for all those years. Check out his YouTube channel. It's The Motor Oil Geek. He posts videos every couple of weeks. And also visit his website for your used oil analysis at speeddiagnostics.com. So until next time, I'm Matt Clausen saying, hey, keep that greasy side down.